Thrown out before winter, she built a sod cabin for $2. Heinrich Folkmeyer, who had survived 9 Nebraska winters, told her plainly, "You will freeze, and your children will freeze beside you." She had $2, 2 children, and walls to raise that took 3 strong men. On January 12th, 1888, the temperature dropped 60 degrees in 6 hours. But 5 months earlier, Anna Brower had never lifted a sod brick or built anything larger than a chicken coop. She arrived in Custer County, Nebraska, in the first week of August, 1887, sitting in the back of a wagon she no longer owned. Her husband Carl had taken their draft horse 3 weeks prior. He had taken $42 in savings. He had taken the future they had planned together and ridden east without a word of explanation or farewell. What he left behind fit in the wagon bed: 2 children, a cast-iron cook stove, bedding for 3, kitchen implements, a shovel, an axe, a handsaw, and enough dried corn and salt pork to last perhaps a month. Anna Brower was 29 years old, German-born, unable to read or write English. She signed documents with an X, the same mark her mother had made in Saxony before the family immigrated in 1879. The claim was 160 acres of Nebraska prairie. Carl had filed on it 6 months earlier, paid the $18 fee, and built nothing. No house, no well, no broken ground, just grass as high as a man's shoulder, stretching in every direction until the earth curved away and the sky swallowed everything. Anna climbed down from the wagon and looked at what her husband had left her. Fritz, her son, was 6 years old. He stood beside her holding his sister's hand. Margaret, Greta, they called her, was 4. She had her father's eyes and her mother's silence. Neither child asked where they would sleep that night. They had learned not to ask questions that had no good answers. The wagon would be their home. Anna understood this immediately. The canvas top had a tier that let rain through, but it was August. The rains would hold off. She had time. Time for what, exactly? She did not yet know. The neighbor arrived on the 3rd day. Heinrich Folkmeyer was 54 years old, German-born like Anna, with a beard that had gone white at the edges and hands that looked like they had been carved from oak. He had homesteaded in Custer County in 1878, 9 winters on the Nebraska plains. He had helped build more than 20 sod houses, always with crews of 3 or 4 men, always with horses and a breaking plow to cut the sod in proper strips. He rode up to Anna's wagon in the late afternoon, studied the empty claim, the 2 small children playing in the grass, the woman standing alone beside a cold cook stove. "You are the wife," he said. It was not a question. "I am the wife," Anna said. Heinrich dismounted slowly, the way old men do when their knees have memories. He walked the perimeter of where a house might go, kicking at the sod with his boot, testing the grass density. Then he came back to Anna and told her what she was facing. A sod house required cutting an acre of prairie into bricks. Each brick weighed 50 pounds, sometimes more when wet. The walls had to be 2 feet thick and 7 feet tall, hundreds of bricks stacked and leveled. The ridgepole alone took 3 strong men to lift. A crew with horses and a plow could build a soddy in a week. A woman alone with no horse and no plow could not build one at all. "You have money?" Heinrich asked. $2, Anna said, "and 60 cents. Heinrich absorbed this information the way a man absorbs news of a death. He nodded slowly. "A frame house costs $600 in lumber," he said, "shipped from Iowa. A hired crew to build a soddy costs $25. You have $2. "And 60 cents, Anna said again, because it was all she had, and it mattered to her that someone knew the exact number. Heinrich looked at Fritz and Greta. The boy was watching him with the wariness children develop, when adults have failed them too many times. The girl had found a grasshopper and was following it through the grass, oblivious to conversations about survival. "You cannot build a house alone," Heinrich said. "Not a frame house, not a sod house, not any house." He paused. The words came harder now. "You should find a husband, quickly. A man with a claim already proved. Or sell this land for whatever you can get, $20, maybe 30, and use the money to travel back east before September ends." Anna said nothing. "If you stay," Heinrich continued, "you will need to build. If you try to build alone, you will fail. If you fail, winter will come anyway." He looked at the children one more time. A woman alone cannot cut sod, raise walls, and set a ridgepole before the cold. You will freeze in that half-built hovel, and your children will freeze beside you. He mounted his horse. He was not a cruel man. He believed he was saving her life by being honest. "I have seen it before," he said. "Newcomers who think the prairie is kind. The prairie is not kind. It takes everything you have, and then it takes what you do not have. Sell the claim. Go east. Do not let pride kill your children." He rode away without looking back. Anna stood beside the wagon and watched him disappear into the grass. Fritz came and stood next to her. He did not ask what the old man had said. He had heard enough. "Mama," he said quietly, "what are we going to do?" Anna looked at the empty prairie. She looked at the wagon that was not hers. She looked at her son, who was 6 years old, and already understood that the world did not give second chances to people like them. "I don't know yet," she said. It was the most honest answer she had. 3 days later, Anna walked the claim with her children beside her. She had spent those 3 days counting their food, enough for perhaps 3 weeks if she stretched it, counting the miles to town, a full day's walk each way, counting the weeks until the first hard freeze, 12, maybe 14 if the weather held, counting the money, $2.60, enough for almost nothing. The numbers did not add up to survival. Heinrich Volkmeier was right about that. She could not afford lumber. She could not afford hired labor. She could not afford a horse or a plow, or any of the things that made building possible. But as she walked, she noticed something. The grass beneath her feet was thick, not just thick, dense, matted. When she knelt and pushed her fingers into the soil, she felt roots woven together like rope, holding the earth in a single mass. She pulled, and a chunk of sod came up intact, trailing dirt but refusing to crumble. She remembered her father. Before the immigration, before America, before Nebraska was even a word she knew. Her father had built a root cellar in Saxony by cutting blocks of earth and stacking them like stones. The cellar had lasted 20 years. The walls never shifted. The earth held itself together. Anna looked at the sod in her hands, 12 inches wide, 4 inches thick. It weighed perhaps 40 pounds, less than a sack of flour, less than Greta when the child fell asleep and had to be carried to bed. She could lift 40 pounds. She had been lifting 40 pounds her entire life. The question was whether she could lift it enough times. That night after the children slept, Anna sat beside the wagon and drew figures in the dirt with a stick. A standard sod house was 14 feet by 16 feet, walls 2 feet thick, 7 feet tall. She did not know exactly how many bricks that required, but she knew it was many, too many for one person to cut and haul and stack before winter. But what if the house was smaller? She erased the figures and started again, 10 feet by 12 feet, barely larger than the wagon bed, walls the same thickness. She understood somehow that the thickness was important, though she could not have explained why, but only 5 feet tall above ground. What if she dug down first, 2 feet below the surface? Then the walls only needed to rise 5 feet above that, not 7. Smaller house, shorter walls, fewer bricks. She counted on her fingers, estimating. A standard house needed 300 bricks, maybe more. Her house might need 180. Still impossible, but less impossible. The ridgepole was the other problem. Heinrich had said it took 3 strong men. She had seen enough construction to know he was not exaggerating. A single beam spanning 10 feet, heavy enough to support a sod roof weighted with snow, one woman could not lift that alone. But what if there was no single beam? Anna thought about the willow trees growing along the creek 3/4 of a mile away. Thin, flexible poles. One pole was useless, but 3 poles lashed together might hold weight, and 3 thin poles she could lift. The plan took shape in the dark, scratched into Nebraska dirt with a stick, erased and redrawn until the numbers almost made sense. Almost. She still had no horse, no plow, no help, but she had 2 hands. She had 12 weeks, and she had 2 children who would freeze if she did not try. Clara Hoffman arrived 2 days later with a basket of eggs and a loaf of bread. She was 38 years old, the wife of Wilhelm Hoffman, mother of 4 children who had survived infancy on the Nebraska prairie. She lived 2 miles north, in a frame house her husband had built with help from 3 neighbors. She had heard about the abandoned woman on the Brower claim. "Trading," Clara said when she handed Anna the basket. "For some mending you might do later." It was not trading. They both knew it. But frontier charity required the pretense of exchange, and Anna accepted the fiction along with the food. Clara walked the claim with Anna and listened to the plan. The small dimensions, the dug-down foundation, the bundled ridge poles instead of a single beam. When Anna finished explaining, Clara was quiet for a long moment. "It's half the size of any dwelling in the county," she said finally. "That only needs to keep 3 people alive. You'll need at least 100 trips hauling sod from the cutting site to the building site. You have no wagon, no sledge, just a canvas tarp." "I know." "The roof poles have to rest on something. You'll need supports. You'll need rafters. You'll need brush for the underlayer." Clara paused. "What happens if you get sick? If one of the children gets sick? There's no one to finish the work." Anna did not argue. Clara's concerns were real. Every one of them could kill her. "I have no other choice," Anna said. "If I don't try, we lose the claim and freeze anyway. If I try and fail, at least we freeze in a place that might have been home." Clara looked at the empty prairie, at the 2 children playing near the wagon, at the woman who was already sunburned and calloused from 3 days of digging a foundation that might never hold walls. "I can lend you a spade," Clara said. "A better one than that broken thing you've been using." "I'll take it." "I can't lend you a horse. We need both for harvest." "I understand." Clara reached into her basket and pulled out a small jar of lard. "For your hands," she said. "The blisters will crack if you don't treat them." She rode home that evening and told her husband about the woman on the Brower claim. Wilhelm Hoffman shook his head. "She'll give up by September," he said. "They always do." But Clara wasn't certain. She had seen something in Anna Brower's face. Not confidence exactly, but something harder. The look of someone who had already accepted that she might die and decided to work anyway. "That woman will either prove us all wrong," Clara said, "or she'll prove us right. Either way, we'll know by January." 2 weeks into the construction, Anna walked to town to purchase a window. The general store sat at the end of a single dirt street, surrounded by the optimistic beginnings of a settlement that might become something someday. The proprietor was Silas Murdoch, 45 years old, American-born, with the soft hands of a man who had never cut sod or hauled water or done anything that left calluses. Silas Murdoch owned the store. He also held mortgages on several claims in the county, and had acquired 3 failed homesteads in the past 2 years. He was interested in land the way some men were interested in horses or women, always calculating value, always watching for weakness. He had heard about the Brower claim. Everybody had. Anna entered the store with $2.60 in her pocket and a list in her head. Window glass. Nails if she could afford them, nothing else. She found the window panes stacked against the back wall, small rectangles of glass that would let light into a house that did not yet exist. Mrs. Brower, Silas said from behind the counter. He pronounced her name wrong, flattening the vowels the way Americans did. I heard about your situation. Anna selected a pane, 8 inches by 12 inches, $1.12, according to the hand-lettered sign. I heard you're building a house out there. Silas leaned against the counter, watching her. By yourself. Anna brought the window pane to the counter. She counted out $1.12, leaving herself with $1.48. People are talking, Silas continued, saying you're building a child's playhouse, 10 by 12, they say. Is that right? Anna pushed the money across the counter. A house that size won't hold heat, Silas said. Won't hold a family either, not through a Nebraska winter. He picked up the coins slowly, one at a time, as if counting her future along with her money. I could take that claim off your hands. $20. That's more than you'll have if you freeze out there. Anna waited for her window glass. I've seen women in your situation before. Silas wrapped the glass in paper, taking his time. Pride keeps them working until the cold takes their fingers, their children, their lives. Sell now while you still have the strength to walk away. Anna took the wrapped glass. She did not thank him. She walked out of the store and began the long walk back to her claim, carrying a piece of her future in her hands, $1.12 worth of light, purchased with money she could not spare for a house that everyone said would fail. Behind her, Silas Murdoch watched through the store window. He was patient. He could wait. The claim would be available by spring. The woman was already dead. She just didn't know it yet. The work had its own rhythm. Cut, haul, stack, rest, cut again. Anna woke before dawn and worked until she could no longer see. She cut sod with the borrowed spade, slicing vertical lines into the prairie 12 inches apart, then horizontal lines every 18 inches to create bricks she could lift. The grass roots fought her. Each brick required a dozen cuts, and then a hard prying motion to break it free from the earth. She loaded the bricks onto a canvas tarp, 3 at a time, 4 if she pushed herself, and dragged them to the building site. The tarp left trails in the grass like the marks of some enormous snake. After a week, the trails had worn down to bare dirt. The foundation was dug. 2 feet below the surface, 10 by 12, the walls of the pit shored up with the first course of sod. Now she was building upward, brick by brick, course by course, the walls rising inch by inch toward something that might become a roof. Her hands blistered on the 2nd day. The blisters broke on the 4th day. By the end of the 2nd week, calluses had formed, thick ridges of hardened skin that cracked and bled when the weather turned dry. She used Clara's lard every night, rubbing it into the cracks, wrapping her hands in cloth while she slept. Her back ached constantly. Not the dull ache of a long day's work, but a sharp, grinding pain that settled into her spine and refused to leave. She slept on her stomach because lying on her back made the muscles seize. Some mornings she could not stand upright until she had walked in circles for 10 minutes, forcing her body to remember how to move. She gave the larger portions of food to Fritz and Greta. She told herself she was not hungry. By the end of September, her dress hung loose on her frame, and when she caught her reflection in the window glass she had not yet installed, she saw cheekbones that had not been visible in August. Fritz tried to help. He carried brush from the creek bottom, armloads of wild plum and willow branches that would form the roof's underlayer. He held stakes while Anna measured. He watched over Greta when Anna needed both hands free. He was 6 years old, and he worked like someone who understood that his labor might be the difference between living and dying. Greta was too young for real work, but she refused to stay still. She followed Anna everywhere, handing her small items, chattering in a mix of German and English, falling asleep in the wagon while Anna worked past sunset. One evening, Anna looked up and saw Greta dragging a chunk of sod toward the building site, a brick too heavy for her small body, leaving a furrow in the dirt. Anna took the brick from her hands and held her daughter for a long moment without speaking. The walls rose. First course, second course, third course. Each course was 4 inches of height. By the end of September, the walls were 3 feet tall, 12 courses of sod brick, stacked and leveled and chinked with loose dirt. Anna could stand in the pit and see over the walls now. The prairie stretched in every direction, indifferent to her labor, beautiful and lethal in equal measure. The weather turned in the 3rd week of September. Anna woke one morning to frost on the water bucket. A thin skin of ice had formed overnight, and when she broke it with her finger, the cold shocked her fully awake. The air smelled different, sharper, with an edge that had not been there the day before. She looked at her walls, 3 feet tall, 4 more feet needed. 12 weeks had become 9 weeks. 9 weeks had become 6. The frost was a warning. Winter did not negotiate. It did not wait for women to finish building. It came when it came, and everything caught in its path either survived or did not. Anna worked faster. She cut bricks until her arms trembled. She hauled until her shoulders burned. The walls rose another foot by the end of the week, but so did the stakes. The nights grew colder. The geese flew south in long, ragged V formations that seemed to mock her with their freedom. Every morning brought new frost, and every evening brought earlier darkness. Then the rain came. 3 days of continuous downpour. The prairie became a sea of mud. The cut sod turned waterlogged and heavy. Bricks that had weighed 40 pounds now weighed 60. The walls absorbed water like sponges, and Anna watched in horror as the courses seemed to sag, settling into themselves, threatening to collapse. She and the children huddled in the wagon while rain drummed on the canvas and leaked through the tear she had never mended. Fritz shivered despite the blankets. Greta cried from the cold. Anna held them both and watched her walls through the gap in the canvas, waiting for them to fall. They did not fall. When the rain stopped on the 4th day, she climbed out and inspected the damage. The walls had settled, perhaps an inch lower than before, but they had held. The dense root structure of the sod bricks had locked together, grass intertwined with grass, earth gripping earth. The walls looked rougher now, less even, but they were standing. Anna had lost 3 days. 3 days she could not afford. The cutting ground was a muddy mess, unusable for 2 more days after that. 5 days lost in total, but the walls had held. The help came on a Tuesday in the 5th week of October. Johann Schaefer was 62 years old, a Volga German who had emigrated first to Russia and then to Nebraska, arriving in 1880 with a wife who died of cholera in 1884. He lived 4 miles south. Alone on a claim he had proved up years ago, surrounded by the accumulated silence of a man who had outlived everyone he loved. He arrived with a half-broken plow blade and a proposition. "I have watched you work," he said. His English was worse than Anna's, thick with Russian vowels layered over German consonants. "You cut sod by hand, like an animal." Anna waited. "I have a plow, a horse. One day I lend them." He paused, searching for words. "You do washing, mending. what my wife did. It was charity. They both knew it. The trade was wildly unequal. One day with a horse and plow was worth weeks of mending and washing. But Johann Schaefer was offering it anyway, disguised as barter, wrapped in the pretense of mutual benefit. Anna's hands were cracked and bleeding. Her back had not stopped hurting in 3 weeks. Her walls were 4 feet tall and needed to be 5, and then she still had to figure out the roof. She had $1.37 left. She had perhaps 4 weeks until the first hard freeze. Pride told her to refuse. Pride told her that accepting help was admitting defeat. "Yes," she said, "I accept." The next day, Johann arrived with his horse and plow. In 8 hours of work, Anna cut more sod than she had cut by hand in 3 weeks. She cut extra, enough for the roof, enough to bank around the exterior walls for insulation, enough to give her a margin she had never had before. That evening, Johann rode home with a bundle of mended shirts and a stack of washed linens. He did not say goodbye. He did not offer to return. He had given what he could give, and he expected nothing more. Anna stood beside her walls, now 5 feet tall, finally reaching the height she needed, and watched him disappear into the prairie. She had accepted help. She had let someone see her weakness, and she was still standing. The walls were still rising. The house was still possible. The ridgepole nearly killed her. She had gathered willow poles from the creek bottom, thin, flexible rods 6 to 8 feet long, each weighing perhaps 15 pounds. She lashed 3 together with rope, creating a bundled beam that was stronger than any single pole, but light enough for her to lift. The question was, how to get it to the top of the walls. She built a crude A-frame from 2 longer poles, leaning them against the completed end walls like a tent skeleton. She ran a rope over the peak of the A-frame, creating a simple pulley system. She tied one end of the rope to the bundled ridge beam. She held the other end in her bleeding hands. The beam rose 6 inches, a foot, 2 feet. Then the lashing slipped. The bundled poles twisted, one sliding free of the rope, the whole structure threatening to fall. Anna threw herself against the A-frame, bracing it with her body while she tried to retie the lashing with one hand. The rope cut into her palm. The poles swayed. For one terrible moment, she thought everything would collapse, the ridge beam, the A-frame, all of it crashing down onto walls that might not survive the impact. She caught it, barely. She retied the lashing with shaking hands and resumed hauling. The beam rose higher, 3 feet, 4 feet, the top of the walls. Then the A-frame cracked. One of the poles had a weak spot, a knot she had not noticed in the creek bottom twilight. The wood split with a sound like a gunshot. Anna dropped to the ground as the A-frame tilted sideways, dumping the ridge beam onto the wall top. It landed crooked, half on, half off. Anna scrambled up the ramp she had built for placing high bricks and shoved the beam into position with her shoulder, her hip, every ounce of strength she had left. The ridge beam settled into place, rough, uneven, but in place. Anna sat on the wall top as the sun went down, her hands bleeding, her body shaking, her vision blurred with exhaustion. Below her, Fritz was crying. He had watched the A-frame crack. He had thought his mother was going to fall. "It's all right," Anna called down to him. Her voice cracked. "It's all right. We're almost done." She was lying. She was not almost done. She still needed rafters, brush, grass, sod for the roof, a door, the window installed, the stove connected, 100 details that stood between her and survival. But the ridge beam was up. The impossible part was finished. Heinrich Volkmeier had said it took 3 strong men. She had done it alone. The house was finished on October 10th, 1887. Anna stood outside in the late afternoon light and looked at what she had built. 10 feet by 12 feet, walls 2 feet thick and 5 feet tall above the sunken floor. A sod roof that would leak, she had no illusions about that, but would hold through anything short of a tornado. One window facing south, the glass she had carried from town installed in a frame of salvaged wagon boards. A door of the same boards, hung on leather hinges, latched with a wooden bar. It was the smallest house in Custer County. It had cost $2.60 in cash, $1.12 for the window glass. The rest spent on nails and a few feet of tar paper Clara had found for her. Inside, the stove glowed. The dirt floor was packed hard as stone. The walls rose around them, solid and silent, and warm to the touch where the sun had heated them through the afternoon. Fritz and Greta explored every corner. There were not many corners to explore. The entire interior was perhaps the size of 2 wagon beds side by side, but they explored them anyway. Fritz claimed a spot near the stove. Greta wanted to sleep by the window so she could see the stars. Anna stood in the doorway and watched her children settle into the house she had built with her own hands. Her back ached. Her hands were scarred. She had lost 15 pounds she could not afford to lose. But they had a roof. They had walls. They had a chance. That night, for the first time since Carl left, Anna slept without dreaming of failure. The weeks that followed were a different kind of work. She gathered fuel, twisted grass, buffalo chips, anything that would burn, stacking it against the exterior wall of the house until the pile was taller than Fritz. Clara brought more tar paper, traded for mending, that would take Anna all winter to complete. Old Johann Schaefer came by once with a quarter of venison and refused payment. He said it was from a deer that would have spoiled anyway, but Anna knew there was no such thing as spoiling meat in October. The house performed exactly as Anna had hoped, and better than she had dared expect. On the first truly cold night, 14 degrees, according to the neighbor who kept a thermometer, Anna built a moderate fire and watched the interior temperature settle at 52 degrees. Warm enough to sleep without shivering, warm enough to work without gloves. She noticed something else. When she let the fire die overnight, the walls stayed warm. Not hot, never hot, but warm enough that the interior temperature dropped only slowly, settling in the mid-30s by morning instead of plunging to match the outside air. The walls were holding heat the way a stone holds heat from the sun. She did not understand why. She only knew that her fuel lasted longer than it should have, that her house stayed warmer than it should have, that the hovel Heinrich Volkmeier had predicted would kill them was keeping them alive. December brought real cold. Temperatures dropped below zero and stayed there. Snow fell and did not melt, piling against the sod walls, drifting over the door until Anna had to shovel her way out each morning. The world turned white and silent, sounds muffled by the snow, the prairie erased beneath a blank sheet that stretched to every horizon. Heinrich Volkmeier came by in the second week of December. He had not visited since August, since his warning about freezing children and half-built hovels. He rode up to the buried house, dismounted, and stared at the smoke rising from the chimney. "You're still here," he said when Anna opened the door. "We're still here." He looked at the walls, the roof, the drifted snow that had buried the house to its window. He did not ask to come inside, and Anna did not invite him. Some distance had settled between them that could not be crossed with words. "This cold is nothing," Heinrich said finally. "Wait until January. Wait until a real blizzard. Those thin walls won't hold." "The walls are 2 feet thick. Sod isn't wood. Sod isn't stone. Sod is dirt with grass in it." He shook his head. "One mild winter doesn't prove anything. You got lucky with the fall. Don't mistake luck for skill. He rode away without saying goodbye. Anna watched him go and thought about what he had said. He was not entirely wrong. The winter had been mild so far, cold, yes, but no blizzards, no killing storms, nothing that truly tested what she had built. The walls had held against 14 degrees. They had held against 0. They had not yet been tested against 40 below. She looked at her fuel pile. She had enough for perhaps 2 weeks of heavy burning, maybe 3 if she rationed carefully. She needed more. She spent December gathering what she could find: twisted grass, dried stalks, anything combustible. By the end of the month, she had perhaps 4 weeks' worth of fuel. It would have to be enough. January began with cold so deep it seemed personal. 20 below, 25 below, 30 below on the night of January 5th. Anna burned through her fuel faster than she wanted, keeping the stove going through the long nights, watching the temperature inside the house fluctuate between 45 and 50 degrees, while the temperature outside dropped to numbers she had never imagined. Then, on January 11th, the weather broke. Anna woke to sunlight streaming through her south-facing window. The air felt different, softer, warmer, like spring had arrived 3 months early. She stepped outside and felt the temperature on her skin, above freezing, perhaps 30 degrees, maybe higher. Fritz asked if he could go outside without his coat. She said yes. Across the prairie, other families were making the same decision. Children walked to school in light clothing. Farmers drove to town without gloves. Teachers propped open schoolhouse doors to let in the mild air. After weeks of brutal cold, the warm spell felt like a gift. Anna spent the day gathering more fuel: twisted grass, buffalo chips, dried stalks, anything she could find on the thawed prairie. She did not know why she felt such urgency. The weather was warm. Her fuel supply was adequate. There was no logical reason to work as if her life depended on it, but something in the air felt wrong. The old-timers had a saying about weather that changed too fast. Nothing good comes quick. Temperature swings like this, from 30 below to 30 above in a week, often preceded the worst storms. By evening, she had added perhaps 2 days' worth of fuel to her supply. That night, she went to bed with the fire banked low, trusting the walls to hold whatever warmth they had absorbed during the mild day. Fritz and Greta slept soundly on the bed they shared. The house was quiet except for the small sounds of settling sod and the distant cry of a coyote somewhere on the frozen prairie. Anna did not know that 400 miles to the northwest, a wall of Arctic air was racing south at 40 miles per hour. She did not know that by morning it would reach Montana, that by midday it would cross into Dakota Territory, that by afternoon it would slam into Nebraska with a violence that would be remembered for generations. She only knew that something had changed. The warm spell felt wrong. The silence felt heavy with waiting. She slept poorly, waking often to check the fire, to listen to the wind that was not yet blowing, to wonder why her body refused to rest when rest was what she needed most. The morning of January 12th, 1888, began with sunshine. Anna woke to light streaming through the window, the same mild warmth she had felt the day before. The interior of the house was 42 degrees, cool but comfortable, the walls still radiating heat absorbed during yesterday's thaw. She built a small fire to take the edge off and began preparing breakfast. Fritz was restless. He had been cooped up for most of December and early January, and 2 days of warm weather had reminded him what freedom felt like. He asked to go outside. "Stay close," Anna told him. "Don't go past the fuel pile." He promised. He ran out the door into the mild morning, his breath barely visible in the warm air. Greta wanted to follow, but Anna kept her inside. Something about the sky made her uneasy. A darkness on the northwestern horizon that had not been there at dawn. By mid-morning, the darkness had grown. It was not clouds exactly. It was more like a wall, a gray-white barrier stretching across the horizon, moving toward them with visible speed. Anna stepped outside. The wind had shifted. It had been blowing gently from the south. Now it came from the northwest, and it was no longer gentle. The temperature was dropping. She could feel it on her face, a cold edge cutting through the mild air like a knife through warm butter. "Fritz," she called, "come inside." He was perhaps 200 yards away, near a low spot where buffalo chips collected. He looked up at her call and started walking back. The wall of white hit before he reached the house. One moment Anna could see her son clearly, a small figure moving across the brown prairie. The next moment he was gone, swallowed by a curtain of snow so thick and sudden that the world simply disappeared. The wind struck like a physical blow, nearly knocking her off her feet. The temperature dropped so fast she gasped, the cold searing her lungs with each breath. "Fritz!" She ran toward where he had been, but the snow was everywhere, in her eyes, her mouth, her nose. She could not see the house behind her. She could not see her hand in front of her face. The wind screamed so loud she could not hear her own voice. She stopped, made herself think. The wind was from the northwest. Fritz had been southeast of the house. She turned her back to the wind and walked at an angle, counting steps, praying she had calculated correctly. 30 steps, 40 steps, 50 steps. She collided with him. He was standing frozen in place, crying, already shivering. She grabbed him and turned back toward where the house should be, walking into the wind now, the snow driving into her face like needles of ice. She counted steps again. She could not see. She could not hear. She could only feel the wind and trust that she was moving in the right direction. Her shoulder hit something solid, the sod wall. She had found it. She felt along the wall with her free hand. Fritz clutched against her with the other until she found the door. She pulled it open against the wind and shoved her son inside and threw herself in after him and slammed the door shut behind her. The silence inside was like a physical thing. Greta was crying. Fritz was shaking. Anna leaned against the door, her chest heaving, her face burning where the snow had struck. They were inside. They were alive. The walls surrounded them, 2 feet of solid earth between them and the storm that was trying to kill them. Now they just had to survive until it passed. The first hour inside the house, Anna did not think about survival. She thought only about warmth. Fritz was shaking so hard his teeth chattered. His hands were white at the fingertips, the beginning of frostbite, though Anna did not know the word. She stripped off his wet clothes and wrapped him in every blanket they had, then held him against her body and rubbed his hands between her own until the color began to return. Greta had stopped crying, but something was wrong. Anna noticed it as she held Fritz, the flush on Greta's cheeks, the brightness in her eyes that had nothing to do with fear. She pressed her palm to her daughter's forehead. Hot. Too hot. Greta had been fighting something for days, a cough that would not quit, a tiredness that Anna had attributed to the long winter. Now, in the worst possible moment, the fever had arrived in full. Anna looked at her daughter. She looked at her son, still shivering in her arms. She looked at the door, rattling against its bar as the wind tried to tear it from its hinges. She could not go for help. There was no help. The nearest neighbor was 2 miles away, and 2 miles in this storm meant death. Clara Hoffman might as well have been on the moon. She was alone with a son who had nearly frozen and a daughter who was burning with fever, in a house she had built with her own hands, in the middle of the worst blizzard anyone had ever seen. The walls would either hold or they would not. Anna built up the fire. The storm screamed through the afternoon and into the evening. The sound was unlike anything Anna had experienced, a constant roar that made conversation impossible, punctuated by gusts that shook the entire house. Snow drove against the walls with a hissing, scraping sound, like sand blown against stone. The door rattled. The window, her $1.12 window, vibrated in its frame, but the walls held. Anna touched them as the hours passed, feeling for cold spots, for drafts, for any sign that the storm was breaking through. The exterior surface must have been frozen solid, caked with driven snow, scoured by wind that could kill a man in minutes. But the interior surface was cool, not cold. Perhaps 40 degrees. Perhaps a little less. The fire burned steadily. Anna fed it twisted grass and buffalo chips, watching her fuel supply diminish, calculating how long she could keep the flames going. The interior temperature held at 48 degrees, then 45 as the night deepened and the cold outside intensified, then 42. She checked the thermometer a neighbor had given her, a small mercury tube mounted on a wooden board. Outside temperature, according to the marks, impossible to read. The mercury had retreated below the lowest line on the scale, colder than 40 below, maybe 50 below with the wind. Inside 42 degrees, cold enough to see her breath, cold, but not cold enough to kill. Greta's fever spiked around midnight. The child was delirious, calling for her father, the man who had abandoned them, whose name Anna had not spoken in months. Greta thrashed in the bed, throwing off blankets, sweating, and then shivering, her small body fighting something Anna could not see or touch. Fritz sat beside his sister, holding her hand. He was 7 years old in that moment, not 6, a year added by the weight of watching his mother struggle, his sister suffer. The storm tried to tear their world apart. "Is she going to die?" he asked. Anna did not answer. She did not know the answer. She wet a cloth with water from the bucket, water that had not frozen, because even the bucket stayed above 32 degrees in this house, and pressed it to Greta's forehead. She held her daughter's hand and whispered words she was not sure Greta could hear. German words, words her own mother had whispered to her during childhood fevers, in a house an ocean away, in a life that seemed to belong to someone else. The fire burned lower. Anna faced a choice. She could keep the fire high and burn through her remaining fuel in 8 hours. Or she could let it die to coals and trust the walls to hold what heat remained. If she kept the fire high and ran out of fuel before the storm ended, they would freeze. If she let the fire die and the walls failed to hold heat, they would freeze. She looked at Greta, flushed and sweating. She looked at Fritz, pale and watching. She looked at the walls, 2 feet of Nebraska sod, roots woven through earth, solid as stone. She let the fire die to coals. The next 3 hours were the longest of Anna's life. The interior temperature dropped, 42 degrees, 40, 38. She watched the mercury creep downward and felt the cold settling into her bones. She piled every blanket, every coat, every piece of fabric they owned onto the bed where her children lay. She climbed in beside them and pulled them close, sharing body heat, waiting. 36 degrees. The mercury stopped falling. Anna stared at it in the flickering light of the dying coals. Outside, the temperature was 40 or 50 below zero. The wind was howling at 60 miles per hour. Snow was piling against the walls in drifts that would bury the house by morning. And inside, the temperature had stabilized at 36 degrees. She touched the wall beside the bed. It was cool, but not cold. not frozen. The 2 feet of sod had absorbed heat during the warmer days, and now it was releasing that heat slowly, steadily, like a stone that had been sitting in the sun. The walls were not just blocking the wind, they were giving back what they had taken in. Anna did not understand the science. She did not know the words thermal mass or heat capacity, or any of the terms that would later explain what she was experiencing. She only knew that her walls were warm when they should have been frozen, that her house was holding heat when frame houses across the prairie were turning into ice boxes. She lay in the dark, holding her children, and listened to the storm rage outside. Greta's breathing was ragged but steady. Fritz had fallen asleep, his small body finally surrendering to exhaustion. The coals glowed faintly in the stove. 36 degrees, cold enough to be uncomfortable, but not cold enough to die. Across the prairie, others were not so fortunate. In a frame house 12 miles north, the Hoffman family huddled around a stove that could not keep pace with the cold. Clara had stuffed rags into the gaps around the windows, but snow still blew in through nail holes, forming small drifts on the floor. By midnight, frost had formed on the interior walls, white crystals spreading across the boards like mold, stealing heat from the air faster than the fire could replace it. Willem Hoffman burned through 3 days' worth of firewood in a single night. When the wood ran out, he burned a chair, then a table, then the bed frame from the spare room. By dawn, they had burned everything that would burn, and the interior temperature had still dropped to 28 degrees. Their children survived. But Clara would later say that she thought they were all going to die, that she had sat in her chair watching frost grow on the walls and wondered if anyone would find their bodies before spring. 20 miles to the northwest, a farmer named Peter Grunewald left his frame house to check on his livestock. The barn was 50 feet away, a distance he could normally walk in 30 seconds. He stepped outside and the wind knocked him down. He crawled toward the barn, but lost his direction in the whiteout. When they found him 2 days later, he was frozen solid, 8 feet from his own front door. In a one-room schoolhouse in the next county, a 19-year-old teacher named Lois Royce faced an impossible choice. Her fuel had run out by 3 in the afternoon. The temperature inside the school was dropping fast, 30 degrees, 25, 20. She had 3 students in her care, children whose parents had not yet come to retrieve them when the storm hit. Lois could see a boarding house 82 yards away. 82 yards. The length of a wheat field. A distance she could normally cover in a minute. She tied the children together with rope and led them into the storm. They never reached the boarding house. Lois Royce survived, but she lost both feet to frostbite. The 3 children in her care froze to death within sight of shelter. Anna knew none of this. She only knew that dawn came, and they were still alive. The storm had not ended. The wind still howled. The snow still drove against the walls, but the worst of its fury had passed. The temperature outside was still brutal, perhaps 20 below, but the killing wind had diminished. Light crept through the snow-covered window, gray and feeble, but unmistakably day. Greta's fever had broken during the night. She was weak, her skin pale and damp, but when Anna touched her forehead, it was cool. The crisis had passed. Whatever illness had gripped her daughter, her body had fought it off while the blizzard raged outside. Fritz was already awake, watching his mother with solemn eyes. "Is it over?" he asked. "Almost," Anna said. "Almost." She fed the coals with the last of her prepared fuel, twisted grass, buffalo chips, dried stalks she had gathered during the warm spell. The fire caught and grew. The interior temperature began to climb, 38 degrees, 40, 42. By mid-morning, the wind had died entirely. The silence was so complete it felt like pressure against her ears. Anna opened the door a crack and saw a wall of white snow drifted 4 feet high against the entrance, burying the lower half of the doorway. She pushed through, climbing over the drift, and stood blinking in the sunlight. The world had been erased. The prairie she knew, the grass, the low hills, the fence posts marking the neighbor's claim, all of it was gone, buried beneath a white blanket that stretched to every horizon. The sky was clear and hard and impossibly blue, the sun glaring off the snow with a brightness that made her eyes water. She looked at her house. The sod walls rose from the drifts like something that had grown from the earth, which, in a sense, they had. Snow was piled against every surface, burying the structure nearly to the roofline. But the chimney still poked above the white, and smoke still rose from it, and the walls still stood solid and unbroken. Her house had held. Anna stood in the snow in her bare feet, feeling the cold bite into her skin, and allowed herself one moment of something that might have been triumph. Then she went back inside to care for her children. The death toll came later. 235, according to the official count. Some historians would estimate higher, 400, maybe 500, when you counted the farmers found frozen in their fields weeks later, the children who never recovered from frostbite, the mothers who caught pneumonia nursing sick families in frigid houses. The storm was given a name: the schoolhouse blizzard, the children's blizzard, the worst winter storm in the history of the Great Plains. Anna learned the numbers slowly, in pieces, as neighbors dug out and news traveled the snow-choked roads. The Grunewald farm, where Peter had frozen 8 feet from his door. The Royce School, where 3 children had died in the snow. A family in Dakota Territory who had burned their furniture, then their floorboards, then frozen anyway when the fire could not overcome the cold bleeding through their thin frame walls. The stories had a common thread. Frame houses failed. Fuel ran out. Walls that looked solid let the cold seep through, stealing heat faster than any stove could replace it. And then there were the other stories. The families in sod houses who survived with fuel to spare. The woman in Dakota Territory who had given birth days before the storm and weathered it alone in her soddy while her husband was stranded 20 miles away. The old-timers who had always said that sod was warmer than wood and who had been proven right in the most terrible way imaginable. Mrs. Myrtle Chapin Herrick, whose testimony would be recorded by the Nebraska State Historical Society, said it plainest. Our dugout was so warm that during the blizzard of 1888, we sat in it and let the fire go out. Anna had done the same. She had let the fire die to coals and trusted the walls, and the walls had held. Heinrich Volkmar came to her door in late January. He had spent the 2 weeks since the blizzard helping neighbors dig out, attending funerals, surveying damage. He had seen 3 frame houses that nearly killed their occupants. He had helped bury 2 children who had frozen in a schoolhouse that could not keep out the wind. He had walked the prairie and counted the cost. He rode up to Anna's claim expecting to find her gone, or dead, or broken. Instead, he found smoke rising from a chimney, the sod house half buried in drifted snow, but unmistakably occupied. He dismounted and dug through the drift to reach the door. Anna opened it. She was thin, thinner than she had been in August, but she was alive. Behind her, Fritz and Greta were playing on the dirt floor, their voices the ordinary noise of children who had survived something they were too young to understand. Heinrich stood in the doorway and felt the warmth. He had built frame houses. He had dismissed sod construction as something for the desperate and the poor. He had told this woman, to her face, that her children would freeze in her half-built hovel. He stepped inside and touched the wall. Cool, but not cold. 40 degrees, maybe. Comfortable. I told you those walls wouldn't hold, he said. Anna nodded, but did not speak. I told you your children would freeze. She waited. Heinrich Volkmar looked at the walls for a long moment. He was not a man who admitted error easily. He had survived 9 Nebraska winters. He knew what he knew, but he also knew what he was seeing. I built 3 houses with crews of good men, he said finally. Frame houses, proper houses. 2 of them are destroyed. The Muller children lost fingers to frostbite in the 3rd. They burned every stick of furniture keeping their stove going. He paused. The words came hard. Your dirt house held. I was wrong. Anna could have savored the moment. She could have reminded him of his warnings, his predictions, his certainty that she would fail. She did not. Would you like some coffee? She asked instead. It's not good coffee, but it's warm. Heinrich Volkmar stayed for an hour. He asked questions about the construction, the thickness of the walls, the depth of the foundation, the way she had bundled the ridge poles. He asked about the fuel consumption, how much she had burned, how long it had lasted, why she had let the fire die during the worst of the storm. He left with more questions than answers, but he left understanding something he had not understood before. The dirt house he had dismissed as a hovel had outperformed every frame structure in the county. The prairie had taught him something new. Clara Hoffman arrived 3 days later. She was shaken in a way Anna had never seen, pale, thin, with shadows under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. She sat at Anna's small table and wrapped her hands around a cup of weak coffee and told the story of her family's blizzard night. I stood in our house and watched frost form on the inside of the wall, Clara said. Her voice was flat, emptied of emotion. I thought we were all going to die. I thought I would watch my children freeze in front of me and there would be nothing I could do. But you survived. We survived, barely. Clara looked around the small sod house, at the earthen walls, at the packed dirt floor. I thought your house was too small. I thought you were building a coffin. I told Willem, that woman is going to kill herself and those children with her pride. She set down the cup. I was wrong. You built the only house in this valley that didn't nearly kill its family. Clara asked Anna to help her husband understand how sod construction worked. Willem came the following week, suspicious and uncomfortable, but willing to listen. Anna showed him the wall thickness, the foundation depth, the way the sod bricks interlocked with each layer. She explained how she had banked snow against the exterior, not just for insulation, but because the snow acted as another barrier against the wind. By March, the Hoffmans had decided to build a sod addition to their frame house. They would use Anna's techniques, the dug-down foundation, the double-thick walls, the tar paper under the roof to reduce leaking. It would not be a beautiful structure, but it would be warm. The word spread through Custer County like water through cracked earth. 2 families came to Anna's door in February, asking questions. 3 more in March. By the time the snow melted and the prairie turned from white to brown to the first faint green of spring, at least 6 families had either built new sod structures or modified existing buildings using techniques Anna had demonstrated. She never charged for the advice. She showed everyone who asked, men who had dismissed her, women who had pitied her, neighbors who had expected her to fail. She showed them how to cut sod by hand when a plow wasn't available. She showed them how to bundle thin poles for a ridge beam when no single timber was heavy enough. She showed them how to dig down before building up, reducing the wall height without reducing the protection. Why do you share it all? Clara asked her once. You could make people pay for what you know. Anna thought about the question. She thought about Greta's fever and Fritz's frozen hands and the hours she had spent in the dark, listening to the storm, wondering if dawn would find them alive. No one should lose a child to cold when the prairie offers everything you need to stay warm, she said. She meant it. She had built her house out of desperation, not genius. The earth had been there all along, free, abundant, waiting to be cut and stacked. She had not invented sod construction. She had simply proven that a woman alone could do what everyone said required 3 men and a horse. If that knowledge could save other children, other mothers, other families frozen in frame houses while the wind howled outside, then the knowledge was not hers to sell. It was hers to give. Silas Murdoch never came to Anna's claim. He had predicted her failure with such confidence that her survival embarrassed him. He stopped mentioning her in town. When customers asked about the widow on the Brower claim, he changed the subject. He had wanted her land. He had calculated that her death or departure would return those 160 acres to availability, that he could file on the claim or purchase it at auction for a fraction of its value. He had been patient, waiting for Winter to do what he was too civilized to do himself. But Winter had not cooperated. Anna Brower's dirt house had held when his predictions said it would collapse. Her children were alive when his calculations said they would be dead. Her claim was still occupied when his plans required it to be empty. Silas Murdoch turned his attention to other claims, families who had not survived the winter, land that was genuinely available, opportunities that did not require him to admit he had been wrong. He never acknowledged Anna's success. His silence was its own form of validation. Spring came late that year, as if the prairie itself was exhausted by the winter's violence. The snow melted in stages, first the drifts exposed to sun, then the shaded piles against north-facing walls, finally the stubborn masses packed into hollows and draws. The creeks ran high with snowmelt. The grass began to green. Life returned to the land that had tried so hard to kill everything on it. Anna planted her first crop in April, a small patch of wheat, a garden for vegetables, nothing ambitious. She had proven she could survive a winter. Now she had to prove she could build a life. Fritz helped with the planting. He was 7 now, growing fast, his hands already calloused from work that would have been done by machines in another century, another place. Greta followed them through the rows, dropping seeds into furrows, singing German songs their mother had taught them. The sod house stood solid as ever. The walls had not shifted through the spring thaw. The roof leaked when the rains came heavy, as sod roofs always did, but Anna had positioned her furniture to avoid the drips and learned to live with mud that occasionally fell from the ceiling. It was not a beautiful house. It was not a house that proclaimed success or prosperity or the American dream made manifest. It was a house that looked like what it was, a structure built from desperation by a woman who had no other choice, using materials that cost nothing because nothing was all she had. But it was hers. Every brick she had cut, every wall she had raised, every problem she had solved with cleverness when strength was not enough, with endurance when cleverness failed. Heinrich Volkmeier had said she could not do it. Silas Murdoch had said she would freeze. The prairie had said, in its silent way, that single women did not survive alone on the Nebraska plains. She had answered them all. By the end of 1888, more than a dozen families in Custer County had built or modified structures using the techniques Anna had demonstrated. The sod house moved from a symbol of poverty to something else, not quite respectable, but recognized. The newspapers that had once mocked sod busters as living in dirt huts began to publish accounts of the blizzard survivors, noting which types of houses had held and which had failed. Mrs. W.H. Hodge, a Custer County resident whose testimony would be preserved by the Nebraska State Historical Society, spoke for many when she said, "I think it was a good thing people in those days had sod houses to live in. With no more fuel than they had, they would have frozen in a frame house." Other women homesteaders sought Anna out specifically. If a woman alone could build a house that survived the worst blizzard in memory, They could build too. The doubts that had surrounded her, doubts about her capability, her judgment, her right to occupy land without a man, were harder to sustain when she stood as living proof that the doubters were wrong. Anna never claimed credit for anything larger than her own survival. She built one house. She saved 2 children. She proved one small point about what a desperate woman could accomplish with free materials and no alternatives. That was enough. That was everything. Orsini Anna Brower proved up her claim in 1892, fulfilling the 5-year residency requirement that the Homestead Act demanded. She never remarried. The land was in her name, titled to her alone, and she intended to keep it that way. Carl Brower, wherever he had gone, wherever he had taken their savings and their draft horse and their future together, Carl Brower had no claim on what she had built. The law said the land belonged to the person who had improved it, lived on it, survived on it. That person was Anna. Fritz and Greta grew up on the homestead. They learned to read and write in English, skills their mother never fully mastered. They went to the schoolhouse that had been rebuilt after the blizzard, walking the same prairie that had nearly killed their mother, carrying lunches she packed for them each morning. Anna lived on the claim until her death in 1921, at the age of 63. She built a frame house in 1896 when she could finally afford lumber, a proper house with glass windows and wooden floors and walls that did not grow grass in the spring. But she never tore down the original sod house. She kept it standing as a storage shed, a chicken coop, a reminder of what she had done and what she had survived. The walls that Heinrich Volkmeier said would kill her children stood for 29 years. On January the 12th, 1888, the temperature dropped from 34 degrees above zero to 18 below in less than 6 hours. The wind reached 60 miles per hour. The snow fell so thick that men could not see their own hands. Across the Great Plains, 235 people died, frozen in fields, frozen in schoolhouses, frozen in frame houses that could not hold back the cold. Heinrich Volkmeier had told Anna Brower 5 months before that storm what would happen if she tried to build alone. He had said, "A woman alone cannot cut sod, raise walls, and set a ridgepole before the cold. You will freeze in that half-built hovel, and your children will freeze beside you." He was wrong. Anna Brower's children did not freeze. Her hovel held. Her 2-foot walls absorbed the summer's warmth and released it through the winter's worst night. Her dirt house, the smallest dwelling in Custer County, became the warmest home in the valley on the coldest night in memory. She had built it for $2.60, $1.12 for window glass, the rest for nails and tar paper. Everything else came free from the earth, sod bricks cut by hand, willow poles gathered from the creek, grass roots holding the walls together like the grip of something alive. The sod house stood until 1916, when Anna finally cleared the land for her grandchildren's use. On the day the walls came down, she kept one brick, a 50-pound block of Nebraska earth, roots still visible after nearly 30 years, grass long dead but still woven through the soil. She placed it on the mantel of the frame house she lived in now, beside the window that looked out over the claim she had saved. Visitors sometimes asked what it was. Anna never told them. She did not need to explain. She knew what those walls had done, what they had held, what they had meant. She knew the weight of the brick and the weight of what it represented. The prairie had tried to kill her. She had answered with earth and grass and 2 feet of silence that the wind could not break. That was the story. That was enough.